I think we have reached a point in time when the medium of animation is choosing to evolve. There is no method to surpass oversaturation in any field of work other than evolution. And I guess it was a similar chain of thought that led to extraordinary animation, such as the likes of the Garden of Words or even the Spider-verse. There is a lot of thought and love that goes into the plot, but their greatness was always measured in the degree of respect shown to the visual side of animation. You take a good story, but tell it in such a way that the art has its own voice. But this is obviously not very easy. There are budget constraints, limits with time, and quite simply, a lack of faith in evolution. So it isn't surprising when people try, but don't really stand out. But regardless, you gotta respect it. It is good for the medium. And that is why I feel like artists should have fun with animation, because eventually when they get it right, the visuals would be one for the ages. Going into Blue Eye Samurai, I didn't really know what to expect. The ratings and reviews seemed incredibly positive, which made me hopeful. But when I jumped headfirst into the series, I think I found myself entertained by its visuals a little bit more than the story itself. And this is by no means a stain on the storytelling, but the art of animation is such that sometimes the visuals are as significant as the story. And since there are enough people talking about the series as a whole, I want to talk about the artistic side of the story, the visual aspect of storytelling. Visual depth is something that provides the necessary density to a scene. It tells you there is more to a frame than just the subject at hand. And when cinematography succeeds in doing this, we say that these scenes aren't flat, they have a sense of life to it. Some of the greatest establishing shots ever created were defined by this visual depth. And it brought these worlds to life. And upon watching Blue Eye Samurai, I couldn't help but feel a similar sense of depth in almost all of its frames. The compositions aren't lackluster and mundane, but they actively serve the purpose of drawing you into the visual side of the story. And a composition that persists in these shots throughout the story is the usage of leading lines or the framing through a linear perspective. As the name suggests, this composition leads your eyes along a set of imaginary lines into the subject, normally creating depth to a shot. In this frame, notice how the perspective lines make you look at the figure walking towards the camera. And yes, this isn't a new revelation for this specific show, but it's more of the frequency of this more so of an artistic framing that is put under the spotlight. Going through these frames would take you through similar linear perspectives, again and again and again. And sometimes it gets even better. This composition is one of my favorites from the whole show. It has this lovely symmetry to it, and your eyes are drawn to the subject almost instantly. But the more you look into it, the more you see its artistic qualities. The frame is an overlap of perspectives. At first you have the trees tapering into the vertical plane, creating a convergence point somewhere up here beyond the frame. Then there is this wedge in the plane of horizon that leads your eyes into the center of the frame. But if you look carefully, there lies another perspective, accentuated by the fallen tree trunks, that leads your eyes into the center of the plane of the horizon. And the subject placed in this position almost commands a sense of importance, playing into the visual side of storytelling. And I really love it when artists take their time to make these frames look like individual pieces of art. It was something that I enjoyed quite a lot with movies like Into the Spider-verse. Frames weren't just there as an accessory, but they were calculated. The art meant something. In this composition, the story is intersected by a line through the center. There is symmetry here that divides the art into two. Perhaps not always the case, but sometimes it serves as a dichotomy, a division of good and evil. Different schools of thought.
Revenge is like gold. It does not rust.
And sometimes even to portray a perfect harmony. And while you survey through these scenes, it is also possible to stumble upon some common compositional techniques like the rule of thirds or even the golden ratio, guiding principles used by artists to create aesthetically pleasing compositions. And once again, not particularly a rarity in cinematography, an abundance of different methods of composition clearly shows that there was effort put into making every frame a piece of artwork. Which is why in a show that revolves around its characters, the world building captures as much attention. Composition is the foundation to visual depth, but to take it a step further, it is normal for an artist to dabble in a bit of color. There is no textbook rule on how to use color, but it is well understood that colors incite a psychological response within the average mind. The red coat in Schindler's List, or the overarching green hue of The Matrix. Colors are symbolic, and often they speak a language that runs parallel to the story. Bearing this in mind, I think the language of color in Blue Eye Samurai is immensely clever. Ranging from being tools of composition to mediums of symbolism, colors work their way into every frame with a sense of importance. In this frame, it provides that visual depth while accompanying the composition. The color red is vibrant and something that catches the eye at first glance. A monochromatic setting can create visual and symbolic meaning with a splash of discordant color. And such a color scheme infuses into the environments of the series. Muted colors form the background, with a subtle atmospheric fog that separates the colored subject in the foreground. The predominant color palette follows cold shades of blue. Perhaps not that surprising once you read the title. But the color blue does have some symbolic meaning here. For one, the protagonist Mizu wears the dark shade of blue, which hardly changes color from the start to the end. The color blue, just like the atmosphere in the series, is often considered as cold and depressing, a state of mind that gradually consumes the protagonist. But perhaps the best usage of color is portrayed through Princess Akemi. Akemi wears the most saturated shade of any color in the whole series. Although you can catch her wearing different shades of bright colors, the red kimono is the most prominent representation of her. The color red is said to be sacred in many cultures, and it demands a level of respect, which is portrayed by arguably one of the best compositions throughout the series. The symmetry points to the red kimono of Akemi as it stands out from the guards, creating some sort of an optical hierarchy. And if you were to classify the different connotations of the color red in films, it would boil down to these borderline intense emotions. The more saturated the shade of red, the stronger are these emotions. And call it a mere coincidence, or maybe even my confirmation bias, but I couldn't help but notice how Akemi encounters all of these intense emotions as her character goes through the plot. At the beginning, she experiences fierce love, followed by passion.
I can see it now.
Which then leads her into sticky situations as she comes to terms with violence and blood spill. She then uses this anger against the systematic oppression that she faces.
You breathe now, because I allow it.
And finally, something that is visually presented throughout the series through color and composition, Akemi confronts that power, choosing greatness as her fate.
I want to be great.
This isn't to say that every bit of costume that Akemi wears means something very specific, but here the color red has significance, especially in the form of class or social division. A similar color-inspired storytelling takes place in the 5th episode. When Mizu moves to the countryside to meet Mikio, the colors surrounding her are a rich shade of green. But as her reluctant self learns to trust the man after they get married, the colors of the background comes to life, as shades of orange and yellow and purple envelop this newly found romance within the protagonist. And as this romance reaches its peak, the leaves of the peach tree completely turn bright orange. The seasonal shift from spring to fall portrayed by the colors, closely resembling Mizu's change of heart towards Mikio. But the betrayal abruptly changes this landscape. In this beautifully crafted composition, only a sliver of color remains. Everything else desaturated, a sense of cold winter around the corner, symbolic of the protagonist's mind. The callous deception unleashed an unforgiving anger, perhaps something that is seen in the cold landscape of her surroundings ever since. But as I was surveying these frames for color and composition, I noticed another aspect of visual storytelling that was hiding in plain sight. Perhaps not the most obvious thing to notice, but the stylization of the frames is something that helps animation be distinct. Every frame in Blue Eye Samurai has a lot to offer from the perspective of an artist. All it takes is a bit of time and a random zoom in. For instance, a first impression of this frame from the 3rd episode feels like a lovely transitional nightscape. and that much is perhaps certain. But once you zoom into the picture, you'll notice shapes and figures that feel irregular, or rather imperfect. The brushstrokes seem a bit out of place, and even erratic, almost like the environments are concepts from pre-production. But such a lack of completion is not really a mistake, it seems to be intentional. In recent times, stylistically, animation has been experimenting, resulting in frames that seem artistically imperfect, compared to the cookie-cutter 3D look that we have been accommodating for the previous decade or so. And Blue Eye Samurai is no exception to this. The techniques are clearly quite similar to a show like Arcane or the Spider-verse. That 3D foundation covered with 2D stylization, with the latter being unique to the storytelling. But this does offer a lot of flexibility to the artists, mainly to experiment and put their own signature to every stroke of brush, which is why you end up seeing a lot of conceptual art in a lot of these frames, ditching perfection in search of abstraction. And there is a lot of that going on here. The clouds are just puffy shapes in the sky. The trees are blobs of colors with strokes of grungy paint over them. There is no distinct recreation of grass. They're just lines of paint, no matter the perspective. But these can't be considered as incomplete frames, they're just imperfect. The usage of grainy textures combined with the abstract nature of these backgrounds oftentimes confirm the style of the storytelling. And here, it isn't trying to look perfect and cute, it is meant to be gritty and expressive. And the artists make sure that we acknowledge this every other frame or so. There's a lot of attractive frames that are simply there to appreciate the artistic side of the series as much as the main story. There's no need to capture frames that are out of tune with the overall style. But it seems like the artists had too much fun in creating them, so they did. And as someone who loves the optics of storytelling, I can appreciate that. The overall stylization, ranging from the lack of sharp outlines on the characters to the unadulterated artistic qualities of these backgrounds. This series felt like the definition of let the art do the talking. And the fact that I could talk about the show as a whole, but I'd much rather sit here and admire the art, well, that is visual storytelling for you doing its job. This won't be the first or the last time you'll see artists experiment. This has happened before, and most likely we'll celebrate visual stories long into the future. But I gotta say, this might be a good time to appreciate Western animation. We all know that anime does impress when it comes to that artistic diversity, and for a good while now. But since the year of 2018, I've been seeing artists from the West exploring creative art styles that fully goes against the conventions of Western animation. And when you give that license, the freedom of creativity to artists, that's when you unleash the true potential of animation.